What's up, everyone? Welcome to another Team Kitchen Fable video. Jacob here, and I'm joined by my teammate Steven. And today we're going to be talking about a mechanic from the new set Uprising called Quell. So some of you guys may have seen it in our last video about all the new rules interactions with Uprising. You can go ahead and watch that if you want, but we're just going to go ahead and hop into it. So Quell is a new mechanic from Uprising, and basically it's used to block instances of damage. And aside from that, there's a whole bunch of interesting interactions, and I'm going to let Steven tell you about all of them.
Yep, I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I will tell you about a few things about the Quell mechanic. So currently, with this one we have on screen, with Quell 1, it says that if your hero would be dealt damage, you may pay 1 to prevent 1 of that damage. And then it has what in the rules we call a delayed trigger, which delays its destruction if you do use the Quell effect to the beginning of the end phase of the Quell equipment. So currently, with Quell 1, you can prevent damage events, and you will be replacing the damage that you take by nullifying it with the amount of resources that you paid. This is quite similar to Arcane Barrier. And Arcane Barrier also, you have to kind of wait for the damage to kind of come through, and then you pay the appropriate resources to stop the damage. And then, so currently right now we have Quell 1. If we were to have Quell 3, well, it would work the same way as Arcane Barrier 3, in which if you ever take an instance of damage that is about that size, well, let's say you get where you're going to take 3 damage, and it says, and you have an equipment for the future that says Quell 3, you would pay 3 resources and prevent all 3 of that damage. And similarly with Arcane Barrier, if you only have Quell 3 and you are being dealt 2 damage, you could pay 3 resources and to prevent that 2, but then there's no floating prevention that happens. That is not how that interaction with replacing damage works. Now, there is another similar effect that is about preventing damage, which is the Helios Mitre that we have in Uprising. Helios Mitre is not a replacement effect. It is a replacement effect, and it prevents damage, but you don't have to wait to prevent the damage when you get hit by it. So I'm going to add a little sides here.
Yeah, so like you can only quell when you actively are about to be dealt damage, but you can Helios Mitre at any point in time because you can just target a weapon, right?
No, even better, Helios Mitre doesn't have a target. So it just says pay 2 resources and prevent the next 1 damage that will be dealt to your hero this turn. So if you're expecting damage to come, or maybe you just want to pitch for it for any reason that you might want to get cards out of your hand, that's a way that you could use Helios Mitre, interestingly. But I just wanted to mostly note the differences between Quell, Arcane Barrier, and the Helios Mitre, and the way that those prevention kind of effects work out.
Definitely.
And then additionally, we have the very interesting pieces in the Uprising set are going to be the hero-specific Quell equipment. Now, because not only do these equipments have Quell, they also have an activated ability that usually requires... No, it actually does all of them require to destroy the equipment. So talking about Silken Form specifically, if you use Quell during the opponent's turn to stop, maybe 3 damage by paying a blue, you can actually, at the beginning, before the end phase starts, because that's when Quell does get destroyed, you can activate the instant ability of Silken Form and then preemptively destroy it to use its effect, which in this case would be to transform one of your Ash into an Aether Ashwing. So technically, you could do this with all arm equipments, like the Conduit of Frostburn, or the other equipment, which is Heat Wave. They have varying applications. I think the easiest one to do it for is Silken Form, but technically you could do it with all equipment in a way where not only do you get the effect of quelling, but you also get the instant effect activation here. And then Jacob does have something to say about using these equipment or more in the constructed format.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of use cases for Quell in Limited. I think it was very well designed with the draft heroes in mind. But when I was looking at it, I was very interested in if you could use these in Blitz and Classic Constructed. because we have like Ironhide, we have Iron Rot, and we have Arcane Barrier. These are kind of the other common equipments we got from sets. We do see Ironhide used sometimes. We definitely see Arcane Barrier. That one's obvious. I don't think we see Iron Rot used very many times, except for like against Benji maybe and Blitz. But I do think that Quell has very good use cases. It is limited. It's not like it's going to be usable against every single hero. But I did want to bring up how you could be using Quell in different scenarios in your constructed decks and not just forgetting it, especially if you like pull some cold foil, you might be able to actually use it. Uh, so just the basic ideas are it does have drawback in that it doesn't have like built-in block. You do have to pay into it. So it's like Ironhide. It's not free. So that already kind of discounts very heavy redline decks from being able to take advantage of Quell. But you do have like Guardians and maybe Brute and some other heroes that have a little bit higher blue ratios. I think they can make very good use of Quell against specifically Go Wide heroes. And I wanted to talk about them specifically with regards to Go Wide heroes is that when you have effects like Go Again and Flesh and Blood, I wanted to bring up the mathematics, which is that generally, if there's a card that costs 0 and does not have Go Again, it's going to deal 4 damage. If it costs 0 and it does have Go Again, it's going to deal 3. So you have this, it's a general concept. It's not always followed. Like there are things like Phantasm, there are things like drawbacks in Scar for Scar that can adjust the math further. But there's the general concept in Flesh and Blood. If you're going wide, your damage generally does like one less attack. Your attack does generally one less damage. So the idea of the Go Wide attacks already dealing one less damage kind of makes up for the fact that the Quell isn't free and that you have to pay into it. So what you're doing when you block a Go Wide chain with Quell is actually benefiting even more. The next thing is that a lot of Go Wide decks specifically work on the idea of breakpoints. Here's a very obvious Go Wide card, which is Double Strike. If you just Quell, you pitch a blue to Quell, you stop both Double Strike hits, which is very relevant for Mask of Momentum. Like if they want to trigger Mask, it's going to be really hard to get past it, past Quell if they're just coming in with 1 damage attacks like Double Strike, Kodachis, that type of thing. But specifically, they also have breakpoints like 4 damage stuff like Whelming Gust Wave, where they're coming in with maybe 1 Kodachi into Surging Strike into Whelming Gust Wave. There's 3 extra damage right there that you can stop with 2 cards. And then you hit your Kodachi with Quell, you hit the Surging Gust Wave. It does hit you for 1, but then your last instance of Quell can be used on Whelming. Surging Strike, Whelming Gust Wave. Slurring my words here.
True.
But so it does have kind of obvious implementations against Go Wide decks. And then I wanted to also specifically say how good this is against ninja decks like Katsu, where there's depending on attack reactions. So I have a lot of I've played Guardian for a while, and the Guardian versus Ninja matchup is historically very back and forth. And a lot of the times what it comes down to is if you can get your opponent to waste their resources before you do. So if I'm playing Guardian and my opponent breaks their breaking scales early in the game, then I'm benefiting. But I want to bring up how Quell plays around this because previously, if your opponent breaks breaking scales, you need a whole defense reaction like Sink Below or Fate Foreseen to prevent that damage, and it's kind of a waste. But now, if we have Quell out, this is sitting on the board, and it's kind of just permanently making your opponent afraid to do these buff by 1 attack reactions, because you can just easily pitch a blue, block that 1 buff, and get some extra value on the next cards. So you're preventing even more damage than if you were to do like a Fate Foreseen or a Sink Below. So you have like Breaking Scales, Ancestral Empowerment, Art of War. All of those cards are kind of key cards for Katsu to get value off of. And if you can hold on to your Quell equipment for a long time, it can really make the ninja have to jump through hoops to get value off their own cards. The reason this works is specifically because, like Steven said, you can only Quell when there's damage coming at you. So the ninja has to commit their Breaking Scales or their Ancestral Empowerment before you commit your quell. So this means that it's just sitting there. It's like almost a permanent defense reaction on a card until you use it. So we already know how strong the permanent attack reactions are. I mean, like Katsu's always running breaking scales. It's just such a strong effect. So having kind of the inverse of that in the defensive effect, I think gives the more defensive and mid-range decks very strong options to combat Katsu and his buff by one attacks. So I'm personally thinking that the Quell boots specifically are going to be really useful for Bravo Showstopper and Oldhim to be running against the ninja matchups, and I think it really tilts it in your favor. The last thing is against Lexi for the Guardian heroes with Frostbites. Similarly with Icelander with Frostbites, if they're making you pay extra for your stuff, you sometimes are paying way too much. If the Lexi is coming in with an arrow for 4 damage and you want to do a Fate Foreseen on it, but they flipped an ice card at the beginning of the turn, you're going to have to pay 1 for the Fate Foreseen. But if you have an extra resource sink, such as Quell in your boots, this actually makes paying 1 not so bad. So earlier, the only option would be, before we had Quell, the only option is to pitch a blue to like do 2 defense reactions to kind of not lose too much value. But now that we have Quell, what you can do is pay 1 for a defense reaction and then use the other 2 resources to prevent like some other breakpoints, because they're generally doing 1 or 2 attacks in a turn. And specifically, this works because Quell is not affected by Frostbites. Frostbites do not affect triggered abilities like Quell, Phantasmal Footsteps, that type of thing. They are not increased by Frostbites. So even if they give you another Frostbite after you pay for your Fate Foreseen or Sink Below earlier in the turn, you still get to use 2 resources to stop directly 2 damage. And they also have attack reactions. Like they have sometimes use Lightning Press and Razor Reflex, Rain Razors, that type of thing. So if they're coming in with like a 4 damage attack and you block it with 2-3 blocks and they Razor Reflex it, they're now over by 1. But if you have Quell, then you can just stop the over by 1 again with another card. So it's kind of a little bit more niche scenario. But I just really wanted to point out how strong this can be if you're in a more defensive deck. I guess we can point out how it's good against Prism. I think that's Copium because there's just so many more reasons why Prism is good. But you could at least pitch 2 blues and stop 6 Spectral Shields.
So true.
And they do stop, like, if there's 6 Spectrals and Ode to Wrath on board, they will not be dealing damage, so the extra damage from Ode to Wrath won't hit you. But this is definitely Copium, and it's probably not going to swing the matchup in Guardian's favor, but it is something interesting to bring up. But yeah, aside from all of those places that you could use Quell in constructed formats, I wanted to end the video with one more interesting rules interaction that Steven is going to tell us about.
Sure. Yes. So there is this interesting thing with Frost Hex, because Frost Hex gives Frostbites at the beginning of your end phase, which is the end phase of you as the opponent with the Quell equipment and Frostbite on your side. It is your end phase. So at the beginning of your end phase, this deals 1 arcane damage to you. So what's interesting about this with Quell is that Quell gets destroyed at the beginning of the end phase as well. So let's say you have 1, or let's say you have 3 Frostbites. Let's make it a really bad situation. Let's say you have 3 Frostbites, and at the beginning of the end phase occurs, and you're about to be dealt 3 instances of 1 arcane. You pay a blue and into your Quell equipment and block all 3 damages. And then now that Quell has been used, Quell says at the beginning of the end phase, destroy the quelling equipment. The problem is that the beginning of the end phase already happened. So therefore, what happens is you get to pay for the blue, pitch for the arcane damage that's coming in, and then you do the rest of the end phase triggers, which is just arsenaling and drawing back up. And then this Quell actually waits until the next beginning of end phase, which would in this case be the beginning of end phase of your opponent's turn, to be destroyed. So you kind of get a little cheat of a 1.5 turn cycle of using the Quell equipment, which is quite interesting indeed. Yeah, that's the cool thing about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to know. I think Frostex, it seems to be one of the main win cons that Icelanders are working towards in some decks. Um, so if you're playing a more defensive deck, if you just throw one of your Quell equipments in there for like a big Frostex turn, uh, like Steven said, you can get, it's almost like getting 2 whole turns of value, because if most of their damage is coming from the frostbites at the end of the turn, you stop those, and then on their turn you just have more things to use Quell on. So that's definitely a good interaction to know. Um, so yeah, this basically, we just wanted to talk about this new mechanic. We wanted to talk about how you can consider using it in constructed decks. Um, I think that even more than just Guardian can use it. Like, it's very, very strong against decks like Fi and Ninja, other and Katsu as well. Briar goes wide, although Briar goes wide and tall because of Channel Mount Heroic.
Sure
But
does.
yeah, so definitely consider Quell for your decks. Definitely don't discount it as just a limited mechanic, even though it is very strong and limited, and the limited format is very awesome. So thanks again, everyone, for watching. If you liked the video, go ahead and give a subscribe and comment on if you think you can use Quell in your deck, or if there's any other mechanics from Uprising that you would want to see us do a deeper dive into, and how it affects different matchups and different aspects of the game. But yeah, thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.